I never expected that a broken water heater and a sudden, violent downpour would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when my roommate, Caleb, came home one night. You know how life has these little routines? These patterns that feel so permanent you forget they could ever be anything else. For a year, my pattern was my apartment, my work as a freelance graphic designer, and the quiet, predictable presence of the man who lived in the room across the hall. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was 27, and my world was mostly contained within the four walls of my apartment and the glowing rectangle of my computer screen. I liked my life, for the most part. It was ordered, it was calm, and it was safe. But there was a quiet hum of loneliness beneath it all, a feeling I'd gotten very good at ignoring. My space reflected my personality. Clean lines, neutral colors, books stacked in neat piles, and a singular, thriving succulent on my windowsill. It was a space designed for one. Then there was Caleb. Caleb was not designed for one. He was a force of nature that had somehow been contained within a 120-square-foot bedroom. He worked in construction, and he carried the evidence of his job with him. There was always a fine layer of sawdust on the floor by his door, a pair of heavy, mud-caked boots left to dry in the entryway, and the faint, pleasant scent of cedar and hardwood that clung to the air in the hallway. He was, in a word, everything I wasn't. He was loud where I was quiet, spontaneous where I was meticulous. He was effortlessly charming, with a laugh that could fill the entire apartment and make the windows rattle. From my distant, observational perch, he was also hopelessly, unequivocally straight. He had friends over to watch sports, guys with names like Mike and Dave, who drank beer and yelled at the television. I'd seen him on the phone with his mom, heard him talk about girls he'd dated in the past. He was a textbook example of the kind of guy who would never, in a million years, see me as anything more than his quiet, slightly nerdy roommate. And I was fine with that. Or rather, I told myself I was. It was easier to admire him from a distance, to appreciate the easy way he moved through the world, the kindness he showed when he'd bring me a coffee, because he was getting one anyway, the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he smiled a genuine, unguarded smile. These were small moments, little crumbs I collected and stored away, feeding a part of myself I kept carefully hidden. Our interactions were pleasant, neighborly. We'd chat in the kitchen while he made a protein shake and I made my morning tea. Morning, Lucas. Morning, Caleb. Rough day yesterday. Nah, not too bad. You. It was a script, comfortable and safe. It kept the fragile ecosystem of our shared space in balance. That balance, however, was about to be washed away. Let me take you back to that evening. The day had started with a weird, heavy stillness. The air was thick and humid, the sky a bruised purple-gray that promised something dramatic. I was at my desk, trying to finalize a logo for a new client, but the oppressive atmosphere was making it hard to concentrate. By late afternoon, the sky broke open. It wasn't just rain. It was a biblical deluge, the kind that hammers against the windows and makes you feel grateful for shelter. The sound was a constant roar, punctuated by the deep, resonant rumble of thunder that shook our old apartment building to its foundations. Caleb was late coming home from work. Usually, I'd hear his keys in the lock around 6. But 6 came and went, then 7. I found myself glancing at the clock, a small knot of worry tightening in my stomach. It was just a storm, I told myself. Traffic was probably a nightmare. But still, the worry lingered. His job was physical, outdoors a lot of the time. I pictured him stuck on a site somewhere, trying to pack up tools in this monsoon. It was a strange feeling, this concern. It felt proprietary. It felt more than what a roommate should feel for another roommate. Finally, just after 8, I heard the familiar sound of the key scraping in the lock. But the way the door opened was different. It wasn't the usual confident swing. It was slow, tired. And then he was standing in the entryway, and my breath caught in my throat. He was a drowned man. Rainwater streamed from his hair, plastering it to his forehead. His work jacket was soaked through, dark and heavy, and a puddle was already forming at his feet on the welcome mat. But it was his face that struck me. He looked utterly defeated. The usual spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. "Hey," he said, his voice raspy. He managed a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Caleb, are you okay? You look—" I trailed off, not wanting to state the obvious. Like I wrestled a waterfall and lost. He finished for me, shrugging out of his jacket. The movement seemed to take a monumental effort. Yeah, long day. The site turned into a mud pit. Truck got stuck. The whole 9 yards. He ran a hand through his wet hair, sending droplets flying. All I've been thinking about for the last 3 hours is a hot shower. He started to head toward his side of the apartment, leaving a trail of damp footprints. I went back to my desk, my focus on the logo completely shattered. My concern had now morphed into a quiet, humming sympathy. I could hear him moving around in his room, the sound of his wet boots hitting the floor. A few moments later, I heard the squeak of his bathroom faucet, then a frustrated sigh, then the sound of the faucet again. He appeared in the doorway of my workspace a minute later. He'd taken off his shirt and was holding a towel. His hair was still dripping, and his broad shoulders were slumped. Weird question, he began, looking a little embarrassed. You have hot water, right? I nodded. Yeah, I think so. Why? He sighed, a puff of air that was pure frustration. Figures. The boiler on my side of the building must be out. The super sent a text an hour ago, but my phone died. I've got nothing. Just ice-cold water. He looked at me, a direct, pleading look that felt completely new. Lucas, man, I'm sorry to ask this. I know it's weird, but I'm freezing, and I feel disgusting. Is there any chance at all I could use your shower? The question hung in the air between us, suddenly making the room feel very small. My apartment was my sanctuary. My bathroom was the inner sanctum of that sanctuary. The idea of Caleb, this force of nature, being in that space, it sent a jolt through me that was 1 part anxiety and 2 parts something else, something I didn't dare name. But looking at him, standing there shivering, looking so vulnerable, there was only one possible answer. Yeah, I heard myself say, my voice sounding surprisingly steady. Of course. Don't be silly. Go ahead. Relief washed over his face, so potent and immediate, it was like watching the sun break through clouds. Oh man. Thank you. Seriously. You're a lifesaver. He disappeared into my bathroom, and I was left standing in the middle of my living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear the click of the door, the rush of water as he turned on the faucet. The sound of my shower, a sound I heard every single day, suddenly felt foreign and charged with an almost unbearable intimacy. He was in there, in my space. I busied myself, wiping up the puddle he'd left in the entryway, my movements jerky and uncertain. I was acutely aware of every sound coming from behind that closed door. I tried to go back to work, but it was impossible. My mind was a live wire. I was picturing him in there, shedding his wet, dirty clothes. I imagined the steam clouding up the mirror, the water sluicing over his strong back and broad shoulders. These were thoughts I'd normally push away, categorize as dangerous, and lock in a mental box. But now, with him just 20 feet away, the box had sprung open. The barrier between my carefully curated inner world and my actual reality had just become incredibly, terrifyingly thin. When he was done, he called out, "Hey, Lucas? I didn't bring clothes in here with me. And my stuff is all soaked." My brain short-circuited for a second. Oh, right. I stood up, feeling a fresh wave of nervousness. You can you can grab the towel. It's fine. A moment later, the door opened, and a cloud of steam billowed out, carrying with it the scent of my soap and shampoo. It was a scent I associated with my own quiet mornings, but now it was mixed with something else, with him. He was standing in the doorway, a towel slung low around his hips, another one in his hands that he was using to scrub at his hair. His skin was flushed from the heat, and droplets of water clung to his chest and shoulders, catching the light from the hallway. He looked incredible. There's no other word for it. All the grit and exhaustion from before had been washed away, leaving behind this clean, warm, vital presence that filled my entire apartment. "Thanks again, man," he said, his voice softer now, calmer. "I feel human again." "No problem," I managed to squeak out, my throat suddenly dry. I tried to look at his face, anywhere but the defined line of his abdomen or the way the towel hung precariously on his hips. He walked past me toward his room, and I retreated to the perceived safety of my kitchen, pretending to be intensely interested in making a cup of tea I didn't want. My hands were shaking slightly as I filled the kettle. The whole encounter had lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like it had rewired my entire nervous system. I was trying to calm myself down, to tell myself it was just a practical thing. A guy needed a shower, and I had one. That was it. Nothing more. But here's the thing. While I was standing there, listening to the kettle begin to whistle, Caleb reappeared. He was still just in the towel. He hadn't gone to get dressed. He was leaning against the kitchen doorway, watching me. "So," he began, and his tone was different. It was quieter, more thoughtful. "My room is an icebox. I think I must have left the window cracked open during the storm. My sheets, my blanket, everything feels damp and cold." I turned to face him, my heart doing a slow, heavy drum roll. The storm was still raging outside, a constant, percussive backdrop to the scene unfolding in my kitchen. "Oh," I said, my mind racing to find a practical solution. "I have a spare blanket you can use. Maybe a space heater in the closet somewhere." He shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on mine. He wasn't looking at the closet or around the apartment for a solution. He was just looking at me. And there was a question in his gaze, something hesitant and deeply vulnerable that I had never seen there before. "It's more than that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm chilled to the bone. And I'm so tired I feel like I could fall over right here." He took a small step into the kitchen, closing the distance between us just enough to make the air crackle. The kettle was screaming now, a shrill, insistent noise in the charged silence. I reached over and turned it off, my hand moving on autopilot. "Lucas," he said, and my name on his lips sounded like a plea. "This is going to sound crazy. And if it's too weird, just say no, and I'll go freeze in my room, and it'll be fine. I'll understand." He took a breath. Can I just sleep in your bed tonight? With you? I just want to be warm." That was it. The turning point. The question that changed everything. It wasn't sexual, not explicitly. The way he said it was laced with a desperate need for simple, human comfort. For warmth. But the implications of it, the reality of sharing my bed, my most private space, with him, it was staggering. My mind went blank. Every rational thought, every carefully constructed wall of self-preservation crumbled to dust. All I could see was the raw exhaustion in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he held the towel, and the sheer, unadulterated hope that was shimmering just beneath the surface of his request. I thought about the years of quiet longing. I thought about the chasm I'd always perceived between us, and I saw it shrinking, closing in an instant with one simple, terrifying question. This was a precipice, and I had a choice. I could back away, offer him the spare blanket, and retreat to the safety of my old routine. Or I could jump. So I jumped. "Okay," I whispered. The word felt both impossibly large and incredibly small. "Yes. Okay." The relief on his face was a physical thing, a letting go of tension that made his shoulders sag. A small, grateful smile touched his lips. "Really?" he asked, as if he couldn't believe it. "Really," I confirmed, my voice a little stronger this time. There was an awkward pause, a moment of what now, that hung between us. I don't have anything to wear," he said, gesturing to the towel. "Right," I said, my brain finally kicking back into gear. "I have sweatpants. A t-shirt. They might be a little small, but they're clean." I led the way to my bedroom, my legs feeling unsteady, as if I were walking on a ship in a heavy sea. The room felt different with him in it, charged and alive. I pulled a pair of soft gray sweatpants and a worn-out band t-shirt from my drawer and handed them to him. Our fingers brushed as he took them, a spark of contact that shot straight up my arm. "Thanks," he murmured, his gaze dropping to the clothes in his hands. He went into the bathroom to change, and I used the moment to try and breathe. I sat on the edge of my bed, the bed we were about to share, and stared at my hands. What was I doing? This was insane. He was my straight roommate. This was just a weird, one-off situation born of a storm and a broken boiler. He was just cold. Tomorrow morning, he would wake up, be embarrassed, and we would never speak of it again. The thought was a cold spike of fear in my chest. But then another thought followed. What if it wasn't? What if this was something else? The memory of the look in his eyes in the kitchen, that raw vulnerability, it didn't feel platonic. It felt like a test, a question he was asking without words. He came back into the room, wearing my clothes. The sweatpants were a little short on him, ending just above his ankles, and the t-shirt was snug across his chest and shoulders. He looked young and unexpectedly soft in my worn-out clothes. The sight of him, this big, strong man, looking so gentle and out of place in my things, did something to my heart. It squeezed, painfully. They fit, I said, stating the obvious. They're comfortable, he replied, giving me a small, shy smile. The confident, boisterous Caleb was gone. In his place was this quiet, hesitant person I didn't know at all, but felt strangely connected to. I got up and pulled back the covers on one side of the bed. This side is fine, I said, my voice sounding formal and strange. He nodded and slid under the covers, his back to me. I walked around to the other side, turned off the lamp, and got in, my movements stiff and self-conscious. The bed dipped with his weight. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon, filled with crackling electricity. We lay there in the dark for what felt like an eternity, listening to the sound of the rain against the window and the sound of our own breathing. I was hyper-aware of everything. The warmth radiating from his body, the subtle scent of my soap on his skin. I was lying perfectly still, my muscles rigid, terrified of making a wrong move. Then he shifted. He rolled over to face me. In the dim light filtering in from the street, I could just make out the shape of his face. "Lucas," he whispered. "Yeah." My voice was a croak. "Thank you," he said again. "For this. For everything." "It's okay," I whispered back. He was quiet for another long moment. Then, slowly, tentatively, he moved closer. He didn't say anything. He just shifted across the space between us until his forehead was resting against my shoulder. And then he sighed, a deep, shuddering exhalation, as if he'd been holding his breath all night. He draped an arm across my chest, his hand coming to rest on my other shoulder. He was so warm. His body, solid and real against mine, was a shock to my system. He tucked his head into the curve of my neck, his soft hair tickling my chin. And just like that, he was asleep. His breathing deepened, evening out into the slow, steady rhythm of deep slumber. And I lay there, wide awake, with Caleb curled up against me, using my body as a pillow. My heart was beating so hard I was sure it would wake him. My mind was screaming. This was not something a straight guy did. This was not platonic. This couldn't be. The feel of his weight, the trust it implied, the simple, profound intimacy of it, it was overwhelming. I was terrified and exhilarated all at once. For the first time, the hope I had so carefully suppressed was roaring to life, drowning out the fear. I lay awake for hours, just listening to him breathe, feeling the rise and fall of his chest against mine, and wondering if my entire life had just changed course in the span of a single rainy night. The morning after was an exercise in excruciating silence. I woke up before he did, the gray morning light filtering into the room. He was still wrapped around me, his arms slung possessively over my chest, his face peaceful in sleep. For a few blissful, hazy moments, I let myself believe this was normal. I let myself enjoy the warmth, the weight of him, the simple fact of his presence in my bed. He looked so much younger asleep, the lines of stress and exhaustion completely smoothed away. I could have stayed like that forever. But then my brain came online, and with it, a tidal wave of anxiety. What was going to happen when he woke up? Would he pull away in disgust? Would he laugh it off as a weird, one-time thing? Would he pack his bags and move out, unable to handle the awkwardness? My mind spun, creating a dozen different disastrous scenarios, each one more painful than the last. I carefully, slowly, began to detangle myself from him, moving with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. I managed to slide out of bed without waking him and escape to the kitchen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I made coffee, my hands shaking so badly I spilled grounds all over the counter. I needed the routine, the simple, mechanical act of it, to ground me. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every gurgle of the coffee maker, sounded like a gunshot. I was replaying every single moment from the night before, analyzing it from every conceivable angle. The request to use the shower, the way he looked in just a towel, the story about his cold room. Was it true? Or was it an excuse? And the way he'd fallen asleep, holding on to me like a lifeline. It had felt so real, so meaningful. But maybe for him, it was just a physical act of seeking warmth, devoid of the emotional depth I was desperately projecting onto it. Right. About 20 minutes later, I heard movement from my bedroom. I braced myself, my hand clutching my coffee mug like a shield. Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing my clothes, his hair a mess from sleep. He stopped when he saw me, and a strange, unreadable expression crossed his face. It was a mixture of embarrassment, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite decipher. "Morning," he said, his voice thick with sleep. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, at the wall, at anything but me. "Morning," I replied, my voice tight. "Coffee's ready." "Thanks." He shuffled over to the counter and poured himself a mug, his movements slow and deliberate. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. This was it. This was the moment of excruciating awkwardness I had been dreading. He was going to say something like, "Man, sorry about last night. That was weird." And my fragile bubble of hope would pop. He took a sip of his coffee, leaning his back against the counter. He still wouldn't look at me. "So," he finally said, his voice low, "I should, probably go check on my room. See if the heat is back on." "Yeah," I said, my own gaze fixed on the steam rising from my mug. "Good idea." He didn't move. He just stood there, drinking his coffee, radiating a palpable aura of tension. And the longer the silence went on, the more my hope shriveled. I had misread everything. I had taken a moment of desperation on his part and twisted it into something it wasn't. I was a fool. The quiet loneliness I had lived with for so long suddenly felt vast and crushing. I had tasted something different, and now the old reality was going to be unbearable. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Caleb became a ghost in his own home. He was barely there. He left for work before I woke up and came home late, heading straight to his room and closing the door. The easy, friendly banter in the kitchen was gone, replaced by a strained silence. When we did cross paths in the hallway, it was all quick, mumbled haze and averted eyes. The warmth that had filled the apartment on that rainy night had evaporated, leaving a cold, uncomfortable vacuum in its place. And my mind was a torture chamber. I replayed that night over and over, a continuous loop of hope and doubt. The feel of his hand on my shoulder, the sound of his breathing in the dark. It had felt so real. Had I imagined it all? Had my own desperate longing colored the entire event? I'd alternate between moments of soaring hope, convinced he was just as confused and scared as I was, and crushing despair, certain I had made him so uncomfortable that our friendship, our entire living situation, was ruined. I barely slept. I couldn't focus on work. My own apartment, my sanctuary, now felt like a minefield. Every corner held a memory of that night. The entryway where he'd stood, dripping wet. The bathroom door he'd emerged from. The kitchen where he'd made his desperate, hopeful request. And my bed felt enormous and empty. The side where he had slept felt cold. I was drowning in the unspoken tension, in the vast, gaping space of what was unsaid between us. I was losing my mind, and I knew something had to give. I just didn't realize he would be the one to break the silence. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, 3 days after the storm. The tension had reached a breaking point. I was sitting on the sofa, pretending to read a book, but really just staring at the same page for 10 minutes, my stomach in knots. I had decided I had to say something. I couldn't live like this. I would just apologize for making him uncomfortable, tell him we could forget it ever happened, and try to salvage whatever was left of our roommateship. It would hurt, but it would be better than this agonizing limbo. Just as I was steeling myself, rehearsing the words in my head, Caleb came out of his room. He walked into the living room and just stood there, looking at me. His face was pale, and he looked like he hadn't been sleeping any better than I had. He had dark circles under his eyes. "Lucas," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We need to talk." My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. The verdict. I closed my book and placed it on the cushion beside me, my hands trembling. "Okay," I managed to say. He didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the room, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit I'd seen 100 times. "About the other night," he started, and my stomach plummeted. Here it comes, I thought. That it was a mistake. He took a deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into icy water. "I need to be honest with you," he said, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were filled with a terrifying mix of fear and determination. "I haven't been honest. And I'm sorry for being so weird the last few days. I've been freaking out." I just stared at him, unable to form a response. My mind was a blank slate. "The thing is," he continued, his words coming out in a rush, "my room, it wasn't that cold. I mean, the sheets were a little damp, maybe. But I have other blankets. I have a hoodie. I could have been fine, he paused, letting the words sink in. And the hot water? It came back on an hour after I texted the super. Before I even got home. I blinked, processing this new information. He had hot water. His room was fine. The entire premise for that night, the entire practical, logical reason for him to be in my shower, in my bed, it was a lie. A cold dread, quickly followed by a spark of confusion, began to bloom in my chest. Why would he lie about that? I used it as an excuse, Lucas, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He looked utterly miserable, but he didn't look away. I used the storm and the boiler as an excuse to get close to you. Because I'm a coward. The world tilted on its axis. The narrative I had been torturing myself with, the one where I had misread everything, was completely wrong. The truth was something far more complex and terrifying and wonderful than I could have imagined. I have wanted to talk to you, or something, for months, he went on, his voice cracking with emotion. Every time we're in the kitchen, every time you smile at me, I get this feeling. And it scares the hell out of me. I've never felt this way about a guy before. I didn't even know I could. He let out a short, humorless laugh. I've spent my whole life thinking I was one thing, and then I met you, and suddenly everything is different. And I had no idea what to do. I didn't know if you were gay, if you'd be disgusted, if you'd kick me out. So I did nothing. He finally moved, crossing the room and sinking onto the armchair opposite me, burying his face in his hands. And then the storm happened, and I was so tired and stressed, and I just thought, screw it. I'm going to do something. So I made up that whole stupid story. And then I was in your bed, and it felt so right. It was the best night's sleep I've had in years. And then I woke up and I panicked. I thought, what have I done? I've forced myself on him. I've trapped him, so I ran. I've been hiding in my room for 3 days, trying to figure out how to undo it, or how to apologize, or if I should just move out. He looked up at me then, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He looked broken and hopeful all at once. So that's it, he whispered. That's the truth. I'm so sorry, Lucas. But I think I'm falling for you. And it's terrifying. All the air left my lungs in a rush. The fear, the anxiety, the doubt that had been my constant companions for days, for months, for years, it all just evaporated. It was replaced by a wave of relief so profound it felt like I could float away. He wasn't disgusted. He wasn't straight. He was just as lost and hopeful and terrified as I was. I stood up, crossed the small space between us, and knelt on the floor in front of his chair. I took his hands in mine. They were cold and trembling. Caleb, I said, and my own voice was thick with emotion. You have nothing to be sorry for. He looked at me, his expression full of disbelief. I've been feeling the same way. I confessed, the words I had kept locked away for so long finally spilling out. For months, I thought you were the straightest guy in the world. I thought I was completely invisible to you. That night, that was the best and most terrifying night of my life. And these last few days, thinking I had imagined it all, thinking I had ruined everything, it's been hell. A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. I reached up and gently wiped it away with my thumb. His skin was soft. So you're not mad? He asked, his voice fragile. I shook my head, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in days. I'm the opposite of mad. And then, the space between us disappeared. I don't know who moved first. It didn't matter. One moment we were kneeling there, holding hands, and the next his mouth was on mine. It wasn't like the chaste, accidental closeness of that rainy night. This was a real kiss. It was hesitant at first, a question, and then it deepened as we both realized this was real, this was happening. It was a kiss full of relief and pent-up longing and the dizzying promise of a new beginning. It tasted of coffee and salt and a hope so powerful it felt like it could light up the entire city. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, resting our foreheads against each other. So, he breathed out, a real smile, a true Caleb smile, finally reaching his eyes. What does this make us? I don't know, I whispered back, laughing a little. Warm, I guess. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world of vibrant color. The awkwardness that had plagued our apartment vanished, replaced by an easy, joyful intimacy that I had never imagined possible. Our first official date was a walk in the park, holding hands, feeling both ridiculously teenage and profoundly adult. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps, sharing the stories of our lives that we'd previously kept hidden behind polite roommate chatter. I learned that his confident exterior was a carefully constructed defense, a way to navigate a world that had always expected him to be a certain kind of man. He learned about my quiet anxieties, my tendency to overthink everything, and instead of seeing it as a flaw, he called it my superpower. He said it meant I noticed things, that I cared deeply. Our apartment, once divided into his space and my space, became our space. His muddy boots still ended up by the door, but now, sometimes, my sketchbook lay on the arm of the sofa next to them. We fell into a rhythm that was both new and comfortingly familiar. We'd cook dinner together, navigate each other's paths in our small kitchen, our movements a dance of casual touches and soft smiles. One evening, about a month later, another storm rolled in. The rain beat against the windows, a rhythmic drumming that was no longer threatening, but soothing. We were curled up on the sofa under a single blanket, watching some stupid movie we weren't paying attention to. I was leaning against his chest, his arms wrapped securely around me, his chin resting on the top of my head. The feeling of his steady heartbeat against my back was the most comforting sound in the world. He chuckled softly. "You know," he murmured into my hair, "this is way better than pretending my room is cold." I laughed, tilting my head back to look at him. "You are never, ever going to live that down." "I don't want to," he said, his expression turning serious. He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, gentle kiss that was full of a quiet, settled love. It was the best lie I ever told. It led me here. And in that moment, pressed against him with the storm raging outside, I thought about how strange life is. We spend so much time building walls to protect ourselves, curating these safe, predictable lives, terrified of what might happen if we let someone in. We convince ourselves that happiness lies in order and control. But that's not it, is it? I never would have chosen a broken boiler or a torrential downpour. I never would have been brave enough to ask for what I wanted. But sometimes, life just happens. Sometimes, a storm comes and washes away all your careful plans, and you find yourself standing in the wreckage, face to face with the one person who can help you rebuild. And you realize that true safety isn't found in being alone. It's found in the vulnerability of asking for help, in the courage to offer it, and in the profound, simple warmth of another person's arms.